Hi, and welcome to Together, the podcast where we dive into conscious partnership, conscious parenting, and also this community aspect, diving into this we space, the together space, the relational space. And today we are excited to have a special guest. It's not just Courtney and I today. We've got a guest, and her name is Sarah Wildeman. Welcome, Sarah.
And Sarah, we started connecting on social media, and I feel called every time she posts on there. I feel so lit up and inspired by what she's posting about. She's got a beautiful page called Our Common and is doing a lot of work around revillaging and relationship on the community level and looking at intimacy on the different levels of our lives. And so we're excited because for us, sacred relating isn't just relating with our partner, it's also the sacred relating, the intimacy required to weave consciously with community members, with village, with, the different levels and layers of support in our lives. And so we're excited to dive into this piece, and we'd love it, Sarah, if you could share a little bit about Our Common and what it is that you do, and just to orient the listeners a bit.
Thank you. Yeah, I describe our common as a coaching and consulting firm meets community hub, and that's because I
Uh-huh.
like all of my work to be founded in real and meaningful relationship, and for it to be a place that belongs to the we, to the collective. That name, our common, I really intentionally used the word our because I wanted people to land on my work and on my website and feel like, "Oh, this work belongs to me too. I belong here. This is for me." And I do work one-on-one and with leaders and with teams and with living communities, mostly to navigate complex and nuanced relationship dynamics. I love your language of conscious relating. And also run a revillaging course, a 6-month course around reweaving the village into our everyday lives, or helping folks cultivate tangible experiences of community in the everyday.
Everything you're saying is like, yes. Do you want to describe a little bit about what revillaging is for people?
Yeah, I use this word re-villaging because I really believe that humans inherently are wired as social beings. And, I'm not a historian, so I won't speak accurately to timelines in history, but I think we all know, looking back through history, that humans have survived because of shared and collective resourcing and support and living. And, in recent generations, we have lost in many ways the village. And a friend and I were talking yesterday about how on the news, she said, it's just all in the news lately, how the loss of the village is creating, parental stress, marital stress, economic stress, et cetera. Something like 60% of parents are registering that they feel like they are drowning in stress, and this culture of independence, and it's driven by so many things, obviously, that families feel this need to operate independently, or individuals are trying to operate independently, and we've lost a lot of the functions of the village. Those things all have become outsourced, and things that we now have to pay for. We have to hire out to get support for so many things that used to inherently be woven into how relationship was done and how families were raised, and how culture survived really for a long time. And modern conveniences have made it such that we can prioritize independence over that collective we. And so that part is part of the remembering or returning to the village, because I don't think it's a new idea to weave village and to build lives of interdependence with others beyond our nuclear families. And yet it does require kind of a returning or a reorientation towards something that maybe we have to tap into as a more inherent way of being. And that is probably for most people a bit uncomfortable if it's not what they have been raised inside of. But revillaging really is about building lives, and cultivating a posture or an orientation towards interdependence.
Mhm. I really love this because I love the where you're coming at this from because in our world, we live in the Slocan Valley and the Kootenays, and there's so many people that are like, let's get back into living in community. Let's get back into, there's so much gusto about that on a practical level, being motivated from the longing or the sadness or the loneliness or the remembering in the body.
Mhm.
And yet time and time again, I have witnessed and in my own experiences in village too, there's such a skill set needed to remember how to do it, because what happens is we come back into, okay, let's practice it. And in some ways we know it in ourselves, but in other ways we haven't been shown the skills. If we haven't been modeled it, if we haven't been around it, suddenly we're trying to do I love how you talked about complex, working with
Mhm.
complex because community level relating can be very complex. And I think this is where a lot of communities, a lot of villages, people who are called to that hit the complexity and the overwhelm. And then it's like, I'm just going to stay in my nuclear family because that feels more simple.
Yeah. Well, you
Yeah.
spoke, Courtney, there about how people talk about it because they feel this longing, which I think is often how we discover new paths or new ways of doing life, as we feel some sort of absence or some longing, and whether that's driven by a sense of loneliness or a practical need, or like you said, that embodied, like intuitive sense that we need more of this. But I think often when we are driven by longing and we aren't thinking consciously, we get to the thing and it's hard. And we
Mhm.
think, well, okay, but it's not, I was picturing the longing had me dreaming up all the positive things about it, the shared responsibility and never, not feeling alone. And I wasn't longing for like hard conversations. I didn't think I was longing for compromise. I wasn't longing for like dealing with your annoying habits. I wasn't and so then we find ourselves surprised. And I I tend to think more and more, and Jesse, my husband, often puts this question to us, which is like, what is the suffering that you want to choose? And this idea that every path carries its challenge or its suffering, and recognizing, yeah, we can maintain independence, and that has a particular absence and a particular type of longing. And absolutely, if you move more into a communal or interdependent way of living, you are going to have your own longings for space and to make your own decisions and to just for everyone to go away and leave you alone sometimes, right? So recognizing that in that process, we need to know, okay, I'm longing for something, and is that thing that I'm longing for worth the quote unquote suffering or the challenge that will come alongside it? Because there is no path that doesn't have that, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I love everything you're sharing about this because there's so much richness in the learning of this remembering and this returning. And I love it that you really address like that somatic piece, like this feeling in the body of here's this need or here's this longing. And where I first noticed this the most was when we had a child. And I remember just having this palpable experience like, oh my God, here we are. We have this human being. This is quite a transition from it just being the two of us to now all of a sudden we're responsible for this human. And then after our midwife Diane left, it was like just us. And we're like, my body was like, I don't feel like this is how it's supposed to be. Where is
Yeah.
everyone? Like, I feel like this would be the place that, you know, Courtney would be surrounded by a team of people and not just me trying to clean up the tub, clean the kitchen, cook food, take the baby, help her go, like there's so many roles and responsibilities in trying to do it in this construct that collectively we have subscribed to of like, yeah, let's all just be a partnership, create a
Yeah.
family and figure it out.
Yeah.
And I remember just feeling this isn't there's something there's a deep wisdom that I feel separated from. Like
Yeah.
there feels like there's so many other resources that are supposed to be here. It feels like there's a knowing of it inside, but it feels really, really, really far away.
Can I can I
Mm.
can I ask you a question about
Yeah.
that? Um, because what my experience is that there were people that would have wanted to offer it in our life. What was it in you that did you know to ask for it?
Well, I feel like we did ask for it, but this was a part I was about to
Oh,
segue
yeah.
into, is that part of the separation of, oh, this in the past feels like it would just be here and available and
Mm.
not a place to ask for. What I feel like collectively we've moved into because of that is, you named it, we got to pay for it, which we've gotten really good at. We have a huge team of people, and the price tag to it is large.
Yeah.
Bringing in all the team members to make the ecosystem work, which yay. And what I notice is, because of that culture that I feel like we are still figuring out, there's this idea that, yeah, you can have it, you can pay for it. There's places where you can ask for it and it'll be offered. But what I notice in me is there's a vulnerability of asking when let's say, if I'm attuning to them and where they're at in their world, I'm like, you're holding a lot. That feels vulnerable to ask you to come hold over here when I feel like I should come over there and hold you. Like, that's my experience of where there's this vulnerability of, whoa, I feel like we're all trying to find this way of resource. How much can I ask for? Do they have it to give? Like, and then me trying to sort that out. And that's my learning in it, in the social piece of trusting that they're a sovereign human. And if they're offering it, I can ask for it and accept. And then that's the vulnerable part of me, because my conditioning is, I'll just figure it all out on my own. That's my
Mm.
shit.
Yeah.
That's like, yep, I'll figure it out. I'll hold it all. I'll subscribe to all the hats and the responsibilities, because that's what I was programmed in.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you took the words right out of my mouth there at the end, Mike, when you were talking about, like, I need to just trust that they are their own sovereign being. And it's the
Yes.
same learning you do in relationship, right? An intimate partnership of, actually, it's my job to know my needs and to bring them forward and to make a request. I can certainly make a request. And somebody else can say, oh, I don't have capacity for that. And that doesn't need to affect the security or the love or the flow of relationship. It's just at that moment, oh, I have a need, and oh, I don't have the capacity, or I do. And then we need to trust that if they say they do, that they do. And if they don't, and
Yes.
they said they did anyways, and they're feeling resentful, that's actually their work to work through. And you can have conversation, you can hold space for that working out of learning between you. But certainly, I do think you said it so well. And I'll speak a little bit to my early parenting journey, because I did live in a context where it was just there, because we lived in community when we had our babies. But I do think for a lot of folks, and this is so much of what we do in my revillaging courses, learn not only the practical aspects of what does it look like to bring our needs forward and to ask for help in community, but that inner work of, how do I build that inner security and that inner sense of rooting and that trust in relationship to be able, because it is vulnerable, to
Yeah.
ask for help. And I think one reframing or reorientation I like around asking for help is that we often think about it as an inconvenience, or that we're being needy in some way. And yet I really believe that people like to be asked for help
Yes.
because we love
Yes.
to give. Actually, it's
Yes.
in our nature to be generous and to feel needed and to feel seen in the gifts that we have to offer. And so I really believe it's kind of an extending of an olive branch. Like, it's a saying to someone like, "Hey, be interwoven with my life. Would you know me? Would you care for me?" And that when we extend a request, we're actually offering gift, like a moment for
Mhm.
somebody to step in, and for the connection to deepen.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's
yeah, go
so
ahead.
interesting for me to hear Mike's version, because I feel very differently about when we had Cedar. Because for me, what I experienced was, I had so many people, I had so many women in my life and I had such a plethora that when I needed it, I could ask, and someone would show up. But the key for me was how many people I had in my life. And I remember realizing, like, ooh, if I only had like 4 friends, like, then that's what I would. But thank goodness I've cultivated a lot of friendships that, like, someone's going to be able to meet me in this. Someone's going to be able to. And but then also noticing that any place where I was like, oh, I really wish I could be met here. if I wasn't being met, it was that. It was exactly that. I have to voice it. I have to reach out and ask. And it's been such a healing journey for me being a mom because I felt so held by my friends and by community because every time I would ask, even if they couldn't exactly offer what it was that I asked for, we would always come up with something even better or like some
Mm.
creative idea would show up, you know? And I was like in awe of this like part of me that wants to figure out what everyone needs first before I ask, instead of just that trust of like, oh, this is what I'm needing. And then watching sort of the magic unfold. And but also feeling that place where it's sort of how vulnerable can I be, you know, to share
Mhm.
like, oh, this is where I'm needing something. Because
Yeah.
there's a place in that where we're having to be seen in the vulnerability, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's curious. It brings up a thing that I'm curious about, and I want to hear from you, Sarah, if you've seen this in the revillaging world. Because what I've noticed is like I can see that for sure. And what comes up for me is the remembering of places where there was like, yeah, the reach out or the request or the thing, the piece for support. And what I've noticed, and I've been a part of men's work for, 9, 10 years, and there's a theme that in the role of the masculine, they
Uh,
feel like there's so much to provide for and so many roles and responsibilities to provide for that it's more difficult to receive or to have a help come in.
mm,
And I'm
Yeah.
curious if you've seen that theme anywhere in your work, because what I've noticed is this dialogue of, yeah, I did ask, it didn't come. They're holding so much.
Mm.
They're trying to show up for all the things. They're trying to show up to support their family, their kids, you know,
Yeah.
trade out with the mama so that she can have a rest, and then being an entrepreneur, guiding a team of people, all those things that it's like, yeah, I want to help you, but my plate's full and I love you. Do you want to chat? We could talk on the phone for a little bit, or we could meet for a coffee, but it's not like, yeah, I'm going to show up and help you stack wood and, all those things. And and this could just be what I attract in my world. So I'm curious to hear from you is,
Yeah.
yeah, around
Yeah.
that
Well,
piece, around the different roles of the masculine and feminine and what's being worked out in the conditioning.
yeah. Yeah, there's a couple things that are coming up. I mean, absolutely. I think if somebody is standing in that archetypal role of provider inside a relationship system, they're going to feel those pressures and it's going to feel that much more vulnerable. And I do think both of what you're speaking about, the conditioning maybe of the masculine and feminine, but also just the nature, the inherent nature, Courtney, you're describing having this whole web of friends. And and maybe I don't want to project this, Mike, but I'm hearing like, okay, it wasn't so clear who I would ask or how I would ask when the time came or when those needs were there.
mhm,
And I think that's also more common that and not universally, but men tend to have a small, if they have a close, intimate circle of friendship, it tends to be smaller, maybe
mhm,
than women. And I think that traverse into motherhood, most women, if they've journeyed that threshold themselves, there is this
mhm,
inherent empathy that's there. And people come around mothers they barely know. I mean, the number of times I've brought food or clothes or
mm,
offered to help a mom that I like don't really know, not because I'm angelic or special, but because it's a normal thing for a mother to see another mother and be like, "Oh, I see you needing, like, let me help." Uh, because that empathy is so strong. So I do think there's some of that conditioning piece for sure that shows up in those archetypal roles that might play into some of those differences. But I also think what you're talking about, Mike, is the system level. And when I'm saying system level, it's like beyond the family system, but actually the community or even societal level shifts that need to happen to actually cultivate more of a village orientation. And part of that is everybody living without margin or living kind of at their capacity, whether
mhm,
that's financial or whether that's energetic or whether that's, their social capacity or their energy. If people are living right at the pushing the boundaries of their capacity and aren't leaving much margin, then it is really hard to move around the world with a posture or an orientation towards generosity because there is
yeah,
this kind of scarcity feeling, scarcity of time, scarcity of energy. And again, there's lots of things we could look to or point at say why so many people live that way. But I think that's been a real intentional choice for us as a family to radically prioritize, maintaining or reserving some capacity in our lives for community. And that has meant being intentional about keeping our kids in less after school activities, or being mindful about, not being away as many weekends as maybe our extended family would love for us to travel and be away more, but actually wanting to reserve some margin to be able to say, oh yeah, we could spontaneously have you over for a barbecue on Friday night, or oh, you're moving? Absolutely. Let's like make that happen and we could shift things around this weekend because there's a buffer in
Mhm.
our capacity. And I think as you do that and you do that alongside others, then there is room, and it doesn't just need to be this exchange. Okay, I can help you, but if you can help me on this other time, but actually, oh yeah, I just can help you, because then I
Mhm.
know somewhere, someone in my web, when the time comes, will help me. And when we cultivate kind of a broader web where there is margin, uh, we can trust it more readily, and we can bring our needs forward maybe in a less vulnerable way, just a more trusting way.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there because for me, if I were to say why I have been able to feel so supported and interconnected is but it's taken a lot of energy. Like the thing about it is, as opposed to if I was in a village and I could just walk out the door and then go here and go here, just is it a lot. I have to allot time to coordinate. Like I spend a lot of time coordinating, right? So then in a week, I end up getting lots of support, interconnection, sharing of resources, but a huge chunk is coordinating that and planning, like meet up here and go there. And, it's that takes a huge bandwidth. And it also takes a lot of devotion. And I can also understand that for people, that can be a lot of pieces to be holding if you're already at the margins. And I was sitting down and actually writing out my priorities too, and realizing, oh, like at the top of my list is leaving space open for that and also planning. And it's but that's also this privilege, right, of having enough space to do that, having the energy to do that. But one of the things that I always love, and I was actually talking with a sister about that last night, is how you can feel inside like, I don't have the space for this. I don't have the time for this. Like this can kind of come up. Oh, this is taking so much energy. And then every time you get there and you are connecting and you're intersharing and you get this idea from this person, and whoa, someone has this solution to that. And oh, you have this insight for them and this tool, and here's this wool sweater. And all of a sudden you feel so filled up, but you have to almost like have enough of that interconnection to get the feedback loop of how much
Mm.
energy actually can flow back into your world when you make that effort.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, you're speaking to such an important piece here, because I do think when people start to evaluate what are the questions or the things that get in the way of living more interdependently, um, it's often scarcity and fear based. And that's the truth of anything that we're trying to step into that's new or change. Usually the things that hold us back is something kind of scarcity or fear oriented. And a lot of the time it is around like, "Ah, I'm afraid of being burnt out or feeling kind of used up or like overextended or et cetera, et cetera." And what I often hear in those ponderings or reflections is an inherent belief that somehow I'm going to give more than I get. And I think a lot of
Mhm.
people feel that way, and they may feel that way for really valid and real reasons rooted in their own experiences or the experiences that they've seen others have. And so I think you're speaking really truly about how we need those practice and those we need to cultivate new and experiences where we start to discover, oh, actually, giving does fill me up. It feels really good, and there's something transcendent that happens when I trust and give generously of myself. And oh, what it feels like to be on the receiving end. Wow, you know, it's vulnerable, it's uncomfortable, and yet there's something that's so bolstering in that. And what I often encourage folks is, if they haven't had those experiences themselves and it feels nerve-wracking, to start to cultivate those experiences, because you have to start somewhere. So if
Mhm.
you're starting with a net zero, all your experiences have been ones where you feel taken advantage of or used up, and you're trying to build something new, is to borrow from the experiences of others, the stories and the remembering that others have about what it's like, and to start really by claiming a belief or a trust that it's possible for yourself as well, and beginning in those small ways, whether it is beginning with the offering or beginning with the asking, and experimenting, because that's how we learn, right? Is the trial and error. And like you said, there could be times where you ask for help and somebody doesn't have it to give. And then there's a learning in that. And you meet a new thing within yourself to stretch into or to explore or to deepen or learn more about, or you ask and you do receive, and that's its own learning, stretching experience. And
Mhm.
so, real encouragement. I mean, there are so many stories out there, present and past, of humans taking care of each other, and so to borrow from those stories, and even the feeling when you read or hear those stories, what it cultivates or what you experience somatically, like, oh, how does that feel in my body, and can I tap into that, and then can I try to take an action out of that place or out of that feeling or experience that I've borrowed from somebody else.
Mm.
Yeah. I love what you're sharing. This is where I'd say we're privileged in the area that we live, being in the Nelson area, Kootenays, is that so much of like that's woven into the culture. Like
Mhm.
the men's circle that I'm a part of, it's a global organization, and the individual groups of the global, piece, we are probably the largest one in the world. And because it's so known and experienced and felt, because what I'd say is, even circling back to the birth piece, there was these layers of like, whoa, I can feel this is the place where like grandma would be sitting over there, and then the hut next door would be here, just we would all be together. Whereas it, like you named, it's intentional effort. My
Mhm.
like my priorities in my week is reaching out to my brothers, reaching out to friends, scheduling calls, driving 2 hours every week to men's circle, facilitating, hosting the other men's circle that I do here every full moon. Like there's so much energy in making it happen, I find, in where I guess I'm at in the culture of it, where it
Yeah.
seems like the villaging part, and I'd love to hear your experience here, because my sense is you've created a bit of that, is what I keep learning is, yeah, it's needed, it's necessary to be a part of that fabric and learn and push the edges. And something you had said just brought up this piece that I've watched time and time and time again after years of being in men's circle. There's this place, and confidential what's shared in there, but just this touch point of men will share and show up, and by the time they've shown up, we've gone through the circle at the end, be like, wow, I really didn't want to come today. Like that fear piece you named, I feel like it's so in our culture that we're weaving out of the DNA and learning the new
Mhm.
thing to trust and be vulnerable and lean in and trust that and get to know and learn how to discern. Is this a relationship of reciprocity? Is this going back and forth? Or do I feel like I'm just exhausted, or they're taking, or I'm giving too much? Because in the men's circle at the end, they're like, whoa, I like this thought came in. I didn't want to go. This was the excuse I wanted to do. And at the end, everyone's just overflowing, like overflowing with resource of feeling connected, received way more than they imagined, gave more than they imagined.
Mhm.
How good that feels, like circling back to that piece you had said. And this is why I feel like there's so much medicine in going back and to the remembering and weaving and making those intentional efforts to feed the fabric of village, because it's the medicine is in the interconnectedness, it's in the interdependence. It's, oh, wait a minute, in the right relation, it's way more helpful. I'm more well, I'm more grounded, I feel safer in my body, way more so than, well, I just got to do and figure everything out on my own.
Yeah.
But just
Yeah.
that piece of like, there's, I'd say, a lot of intentional effort required to make that remembering happen in the present day. And so I'm,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you're right. For a lot of folks, and you're describing this, the scheduling, and there's something inherent to you guys living in a more rural setting where
Mhm.
to
Yes.
see
Yes.
people takes getting in a vehicle and coordinating or whatnot. And I am a big
And well, but also just to add that, and also being a bit picky about the who we're choosing to relate with.
Yeah, Yeah,
Wow.
sure.
Like not like consciously choosing who we're villaging with, and we have a no to villaging with certain,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And
Dynamics
that's
that are, yeah.
let's pick that thread back up because
Yeah.
I'm curious to engage that
yeah.
conversation. But one of the things I do am a big proponent of is proximity as one of the key factors to creating ease in connection. And if we are looking for that, I haven't found a word for it yet, but what I often find myself hungry for, especially having spent 10 years living in intentional community and now living in a single family dwelling where I also run my own business and work out of my house alone, right? So is this craving for what I would call like daily companionship beyond just that of my partner and my kids. So those people that you have kind of everyday interactions, conversations with, where, yeah, maybe you're just talking about the weather or what you're getting up to or what did you make for lunch or how was your weekend. But there is also kind of underneath that, there's this baseline foundational layer of like, hey, I've seen you in your life and you've seen me in my life. And we know that we could talk about the bigger things. And it's those same people with frequency, and that frequency is most easily fed by proximity. I And obviously that resonant connection is a big part of that. Uh, but having lived, I mean, so much of what you describe in those early parenting years, we had both our kids in while we were living in community, actually in two separate communities. So our first daughter was born in the Rockies, where we lived in this little community that was super remote. Um, and yeah, like I didn't cook a meal for the first year of her life, basically.
Mm.
Uh, and, from day one, I had a circle of other mothers who lived on property with me who were there both to offer support, encouragement, listening, but also tangible hands-on help when I was figuring out nursing. And same thing for my husband, some of that kind of mentorship and companionship through this threshold into fatherhood. He was really held by the other men in our community in that journey. And so, again, that experience was so tangible because we didn't have to go we didn't even have a cell phone back then, which is kind of funny to admit, but we would just like knock on the door, like stand at our doorstep and shout, and somebody would show up and help us with the thing. And then our second child was born when we were living in community in the lower mainland on the coast. And she was actually born in a friend's home on a community farm. And that experience, you were describing, Mike, of like, oh, all the women would be there and there would be all the people around. And that was literally our birth experience with our second child. And, in the wee hours of the morning, people popping in at the door, being like, hey, can I bring you flowers? Can I bring you tea? Can we see the baby? What do you need? Do you want us to clean anything up? Because they were, again, that proximity was there. And it's taken a little more time and quite a lot of intentionality to cultivate that same experience now in a more like urban or suburban setting and in a home in a neighborhood. But I would say, now 5 years into living here, we are at an experience that feels quite similar to what we had when we lived on shared land with other families, because that proximity is there in our neighborhood. And we don't have it with every single one of our neighbors, and we have it with varying degrees to folks on our block, and in our broader neighborhood. But there certainly is that showing up and like the knock on the door and, hey, are you home? And can I pop in? And what do you need? That's there. Can I just leave the kids? Or I'm popping out. If the kids need anything, can I tell them they can run to your house? Like all of those little moments that don't require so much of that energy of the planning and the coordinating and the driving, I feel is sort of a balm to my nervous system, the ease that happens with the proximity.
And was that intentional? I'm curious to learn about that. So was that intentional of choosing that location that you're in this urban area for that to happen and organizing like who's in that area? Or did you just show up in that area and then start to cultivate it? Was there a layer of luck in there that there were people just in that area that wanted to participate that were already doing it? Like I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, more the latter, I would say. Maybe luck, but maybe some divine guidance in where we landed. When we did pick where we were going to live, part of it was because we looked at this neighborhood and we said, oh, it's walking distance to the schools. Okay, so it's going to be kind of a family oriented neighborhood. It's going to be a walking oriented neighborhood. And it's in super close proximity to the provincial park that's full of trails and hiking and running and biking. And those are things that we love to do as a family. And so it's probably going to draw in other folks with shared interests or some shared values. And we didn't know much about Vernon, but we were living on an organic farm, and my husband has his permaculture design certificate, and we were at the time that was new for him, and we were pretty excited about permaculture. So we'd done some research, and oh, there's a permaculture group in Vernon, so there's going to be some like-minded folks probably in that broader community. There's an organic farm up the orchard, a few minutes down the road. So we kind of started with this baseline of like, we chose a place that felt like it was likely to have people that aligned with our values or some of our shared interests, and that we're likely to have some folks at a similar stage of life because of the proximity to the school. So there was some intentionality in the choosing, but we didn't know anybody here when we moved here. We bought a house here without knowing anyone and without having jobs here. So it was a bit of a wild act of faith. But then it really from there was a cultivating with quite a lot of intentionality. And you talk about that asking and the vulnerability of asking. I did a lot of seeding, planting seeds when we first landed. Anytime I would meet someone that was in our proximity that I felt some resonance with, or we shared some values or some interests or something, I would just at the end of our conversation say, this was so great, I really feel like we connect, I would love to do this more intentionally.
Mm.
And for some folks, I said that like, I don't know, 20 times. Oh, I really feel like a connection with your family. I love what you guys are up to. I would love to be more intentional about getting our families together. And
Mhm.
sometimes you just have to say it for your own sake, like declare it as an intention to the universe. Like, I am speaking this out so that it happens in some way. And we also chose to live here when we bought here. We made the intention to set down some roots here until the kids finished school to provide some anchoring for them through their school years. And so often we would meet people and people are busy, and we'd have some great conversation, and then 4 months would go by or 5 months would go by and we'd bump into each other again. We'd have a conversation and we'd always say, it's okay. We're not going anywhere. It's fine if it takes time. And just this trusting the long arc of things and knowing we didn't need to have that kind of frenetic, panicky, urgent scarcity feeling in our interactions. Like, it didn't need to be frenzied. It could, oh, yeah, we're here. You're here. Let's like speak some intention into the space and be open-handed and curious, but also like take action along the way. Invite people over or schedule a hike together, that sort of thing. So more I could say about that, but both and a little bit of
Yeah.
thoughtfulness about what we chose, and then a little bit of luck because there's some great people in our neighborhood, and then also some intentionality and thoughtfulness in curating that.
It feels so important to grasp onto that piece and put this into exactly what you're speaking to is the intention and the cultivating and the holding. Because, just to speak to this, I have known people that live in intentional community with proximity and are very isolated. And I
Me
have
too.
known people that live, you know, really far away and not have proximity and have are amazingly interconnected.
Yeah.
So I think proximity, yes, like all the, but it's so much of it is about the intention and the cultivation and that choosing. And one of
Yeah.
the things that I have noticed can happen, and I know I've had to navigate in my own self in our culture, because the well of grief is so big around what should be there but isn't, like that feeling of this should be here but it isn't. I have
Yeah.
watched so many people where they get so stuck there
Yeah.
that then they're not moving into that creativity. And what I'm hearing in everything you're sharing, Sarah, is creativity. What can we do
Mhm.
about this? Oh, we don't know anybody here. But like,
Yeah.
oh, like and sort of that, like it's almost like we're the creators who are, and this is how revillaging is landing for me and how you're speaking is it's that place where you choose, I'm gonna reweave the village, you know, and like, oh, there's that grief, like there's that grief and that longing. I wish it was like this. You know, I notice that in myself sometimes. Oh, there's that grief because it'd be so nice if it was just all set up for me and I didn't have to do anything. And then but this is what's here. And
Yeah.
this, you know, how do I, and for me, it's a daily practice of choosing. And I'd love to hear a little bit about this. I'll give a couple examples of where I had to do this is I remember, and this is also circling back to where you're like, I'd love to touch on that more. For me, you know, there's spaces that are created in the city or the village or the where I could just go and it's set up for me, but it's not resonant mamas. Like it's not a place where when I go, I'm like, oh, this feels so reciprocal and so good. And so, you know, I started to touch a little bit on like the grief. And then it was like, wait, okay, what am I longing for? And for me, I was like, I want like a Waldorf inspired like play group where we da 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 and it doesn't exist. And then I just started reaching out to mamas that were resident. And I said, would you want that? And they're like, yes. And then so then we created it, right? We created it. And there was this place where I could feel I could have spent a long time grieving that it didn't exist. And instead it's like, oh well, let's see. Another one was I was really grieving because I was wanting a lot more touch as a mom. Like I just want to be like that. I'd imagine if you're living with more women and more, there'd be more of that physical tending of each other. And I was just like, I want that. I want that. And like, okay, well, I don't live with people right on the land with me. And so I actually ended up starting a temple group for sisters where we get together and we do these tantric sisterhood practices and it's just all so much touch and we just and the thing is everybody that comes is like this is so good it's so and everyone's helping hold it, right? And so this is where I think this is where we're being asked to weave is like that the longing itself instead of being just a grief is actually the thing that it's like life is saying make this, create this, weave this, not go and you do it by yourself and it's another thing you have to hold, but like invite others in to create it with you.
Yeah, co-create it. Yes, I love this language of creativity and the curiosity, right? What is the longing speaking towards? And this is one of the languages I use around this is this idea of like our relationship ecosystems. Because certainly when we lived in an intentional community, if I was to look at all the different longings and needs and they were all sort of, there's the practical longings or needs and, help with meals and childcare and all that stuff. And there was the intimate, the witnessing, the feeling seen, the feeling known, the feeling cared for. There's the light connections, the walks and the play groups and et cetera, et cetera. There's a place to feel like I had purpose and service and a posture that I could bring my own gifts and give within, all of those needs existed. And if I was to map my relationship ecosystem at the time, pretty much our living community checked all of those same boxes. And yet now, if I look at our lives and I look at the myriad of needs or longings within my life, there are different relationships and some of them overlap and some of them overlap, our neighborhood or our potluck group or these close friends that aren't in either, but they know a lot of those people or, and then there's those friends that are far away or that I connect with online or over the phone. And there's family that's at a distance and actually mapping and recognizing those different needs. They can be tended by different groups, and some of them are ones I've had to reach out or create or be creative, as you described, to initiate of my own kind of calling. And then others are ones I've stepped into or participate in. And I created a little resource for this that's free on my website. That's like a relationship ecosystem mapping tool where you can do just that kind of, because a lot of people I think say, oh, I want community, but they don't really know what they mean. And they're trying to fill one need and then they go to a group and they're like, oh, this isn't what I want, but they don't really know what is the longing that I'm trying to tend to within myself. So yes, resonance with that. The other thing you spoke about, Courtney, that I just think is so important to touch on in probably any relationship work is the tending to our grief. Because I think no relationship is perfect. This is true in intimate partnership. This is true in community. And I think probably I've learned it pretty intimately in both spheres that when we're relating with others, part of the work is recognizing the needs they cannot meet, or the fantasies they don't fulfill, or the ways they aren't what we wish they were, and making space to honor the feeling there is, it's just grief. It doesn't need to become resentment, doesn't need to be anger. Like, that's all it is it's sadness. Oh, I wish that you could meet me in these ways. And I see that you can't, and I'm just gonna make space for myself to be sad about that and let that be okay before moving into, okay, and what's the creative thing? Or what's the other, other relationship space I might wanna reach out to? And, I've had that experience both in my marriage and in our, community living and broader community settings where, I wish for something and it's not what I wish for, and then yeah, there's sadness there, and when we bypass the sadness, I think it morphs and becomes this kind of, it can become this bitterness or this
Mhm.
victimy, weary thing where we just feel kinda tired and grumbly, but when we honor the grief and just acknowledge it for what it allows us to move more freely into that creative space and into that space of seeing what is possible in our relationships. So,
I
yeah.
love that you're yeah, I love that you highlighted that because there's that human part that I feel I've needed so much reflected in the relational space. Like to
Mhm.
mirror, hey, you named it, when difficult life things happen, when you're in that proximity, and if there's that intention to move through it together and welcome everyone's individual process in it, then I notice that's learned. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, there's health in allowing the energy and the emotions to move. Like that was a big one for me. And I notice if there's a place where I'm grieving something and relationally, and this is, something that I'm sensitive to. If there's these relationships where the spiritual bypassing piece comes in, everything's love and light, it's so icky in my body. Like if I'm like, oh, I'm good, I've got myself, but can I share? There's this thing I'm going through. Oh, I'm feeling really sad about this. And if it's like, well, just don't think about that. Just be happy and look at all the things to be grateful for. My system is like, ugh,
Yeah.
oh, like suppress, you're telling me to suppress this. Not that that's, I'm not victim to that, but this is what I'd say is part of the learning being in the communal space is cultivating. What I'm hearing in all of this is it's actually intentionally wanting to cultivate the relational skills to allow myself to be here and other. The more that I can do this in myself and go through my griefs and acknowledge them and get to know them and go to the depth of it, trusting that organically when that energy burns up, it will liberate into, whoa, I have so much to be grateful for. There's not a time that I haven't gone to the depth of the emotion where that doesn't happen. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's just like the weather, the clouds pass and it's like, oh, there's the sun again. This feels so good. But to be met by someone in that process, that's the intimacy, that's the
Mm.
sweetness. And then there's that capacity to then offer it to other. Like I
Mhm.
feel like
Yeah.
there's so much of the juice of being intentionally in the right connections, circling to that piece that you were naming of, we're very intentional of who we
Mhm.
cultivate closeness with. It's that I know
Yeah.
for myself, I just personally, it's my own thing. I have a place inside where I just don't want to cultivate or try to cultivate closeness if there isn't a capacity to go a little bit deeper, to share vulnerably, to be in emotions. If it's everything's got to be love and light, I'm just going to choose not to be close because I know that's not going to satisfy a human need that I have.
Although, wouldn't you say that we have different layers or types of like, so we have like people we live on this road with where there's
Totally.
interconnection. There's like proximity interconnection that it's not emotionally deep. We're not like
Yes.
sharing
Yeah.
deeply about but there's an
Yeah.
interconnection of like we all live on the road and like whose dog is that? And we're gonna get eggs. And like
Yeah.
it's like this kind of, and then there's
Yeah.
like the deeper community,
Yeah, which
right?
thanks for
Yeah.
pointing that out.
Yeah.
Yes, like there's the place which I also love is
Yeah.
cultivating the relationship where there isn't as much resonance,
Yes.
but there's the proximity or there's the
Yeah.
this is what feels good. But I notice what was required relationally in that is so much self-awareness to contain the parts that may lead to hurts, unnecessary hurts.
Mm.
It's like, what is our relationship of reciprocity here?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
imagine, yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off.
No.
Like, right over here. That's
Yeah.
exactly what that kind of relationship ecosystem mapping thing I was talking about
Ah,
is all about. Is identifying, actually every relationship, if it serves its own purpose, and it
mm,
might feel a little extractive. I really don't believe it is, but it might feel a little uncomfortable initially to ask that question. What is the purpose this relationship is serving?
Mhm.
And then what are, either the inherent or intentionally designed agreements that need to come around that purpose to help that relationship meet and serve that purpose? And it's okay that
Mhm.
some relationships, the purpose they serve is kind of practical, friendly, neighborly type interactions. And it's not that like deep witnessing. And if we're bringing those expectations to relationships that don't have the capacity or the skill set to meet them, then absolutely we're frustrated and
Yes.
resentful and disappointed. And so it's so helpful to be mindful of that broader ecosystem and those different needs and recognizing, oh, I don't need to be disappointed that this person isn't deeply understanding me on a soul level, because this relationship isn't designed to serve that purpose. And maybe it will evolve there, and I can be curious and open about that, or I might be boundaried about that, either way. But I don't need to bring those expectations here, because I actually have these other relationships that are designed for that very purpose, that are meeting that and serving that well because of the design and the thoughtfulness and the agreements that we have brought in and around those relationships. And so, yes to all of that. Like, I think layers is another way to describe it. That ecosystem, I think about them as niches in the ecosystem, but you certainly could think about them as layers of relationship or layers of community. Um, yeah.
Mm.
yeah. So for
I,
anyone listening that wants to go deeper on that, what I'm
Yeah.
hearing is go to Sarah's
yeah.
resource and do the mapping.
I'll
Well,
send you the link so you can
Yeah,
find it.
yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. Those of you listening, scroll down, it'll be down in the bottom.
one of the things I think is really important to talk about with community building that I just want to like drop a little seed in here because for me, and I'd love to hear from you and from Mike. For me, the number one skill that I had to learn to tip from being more insular to being more interdependent, it was the key growth point for me was I used to have this aspect of me, and I feel like it's part of the culture I grew up in that wasn't like my family culture, but it was like the culture, like a greater culture, which was we go connect with community when we put on our nice clothes and we clean our house. You know what I mean? And when we're all feeling our best selves, then we get together and it's sweet and it's da 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 da. But that's when we connect. We connect when we're feeling good. We connect when we are our best self. And I know for me in my 20s, I had to really work with that because I was noticing, yeah, it's so easy when you're like single, not a mom, you know, just when you aren't feeling your best, you just stay home. And then when you're feeling your best, you go out. Right. But, to be actually in community, you actually need to be willing to be seen in all the ups and downs of today.
Mm.
I'm not having as great of a day. Today I
Yeah.
am, like people are actually going to see us more in our fullness than just like the best rested, resourced Courtney. And the learning for me, and even as a mom, I have these moments, right, where I have to breathe deeply, like, I want to interconnect today. And cedar's tender and I didn't have a good sleep and my house is like whatever the layers are. And I have to just breathe and be like, and we deserve connection in this reality. But that like place where I can feel the part of me that would isolate and wait until I'm not in that. And because also, well, what will people see about my son? What stories will they have about our family? Like all of that that can cause us to feel safer in that insular way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm curious, you were talking about being intentional about who you're villaging with in your lives. And I do think those more vulnerable, intimate moments, uh, they do require a well holding. And so being thoughtful about, and maybe we don't all have that privilege. And so you kind of trial and error this a little bit, but there are folks that absolutely have seen me at my worst and vice
Yes.
versa. And gosh, what a gift that is. I mean, I think that is one of the truest intimacies when I think about my marriage, like the deepest intimacy of all the types of intimacy we share is seeing and loving each other for a whole as a whole person, because there is nobody that has seen me at my worst more than my husband. I see you looking at each other. And but to feel that belovedness, to be seen and met at the ground level with a friend or a peer or maybe an elder or a mentor or a neighbor or whoever it is, like when we are not at our best, like that's deep belonging. That's what it feels like to be known, not just to be like seen as our shiny, like
Mhm.
world presenting front surface, but actually to be known in our
Mhm.
wholeness.
Yeah.
And I think it is okay to be boundaried or intentional about who we invite
Yes.
into that intimate space, or thoughtful about that, because it's certainly the vulnerability of it creates the potential for uh, hurt or judgment or
Mhm.
harm. And so, that's a dance to discern. Um, you know, it takes work. It actually takes exposing that sometimes to cultivate the culture in a friendship or in a relationship. And sometimes I think it takes real intentional design. I have friends where we've said, like, hey, let's just agree that there is always permission to show up as you are. You never need to apologize, and you don't need, to be well rested, and your house doesn't need to be clean. We might actually name those
Mhm.
agreements with each other, because that naming creates the safety as well for the relationship to rest. You don't need to question it, or even tell myself. We've already told each other, and so that's solid in there. And that's a skill in itself that takes work to cultivate, practice, and play with in relationship.
And the quality that I really hear you're naming there is what the words I would put to is the maturing process. Like that what I'm hearing is that's just the mature way to relate. And oh, the grief that I feel in that place of how much culturally we've been separated from that maturing process, where the messaging came in of, oh, you have feelings, that's a problem, being shamed, criticized, put down. That even happens in a lot of the school systems, in the school system I grew up in, anyways. And being yourself was an issue. And then that internalized piece of I'm a problem, I take up too much space. Here's this gift I have, but it's now actually, you know. And so what I really love that you're highlighting is this is why I love Village. This is why I love our community. This is why I love Sacred Relationship is it's untangling from that conditioning and saying, I'm actually going to open my heart again. I'm
Mm.
going to lean
Yeah.
in with vulnerability. I'm going to let you in and I'm going to show you what's here. And I want to do that for you. Let's what helps you feel good in life? I want to meet that. And
Yeah.
getting to know that in self, getting to know that in other, and then wanting to show up in that. Because what I really hear, and what this is just my experience of you so far, Sarah, is so much courage to lean into the vulnerable situation of life and trusting that the resources you have inside and the skills you've developed that you're going to be met. And if not, you'll find your way. Because even when you highlighted going to move to where you live now,
Yeah.
didn't have jobs, knew that there was this need of being in proximity to the school. And
Yeah.
well, the what I hear in what you shared is the divine guidance was to go for it and to trust that relationship,
Yeah.
and to continually just like, yeah, I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to move forward. And you named it. Yeah, what I sense from you is the skill of, yeah, I'm going to say it 20 times. I'm going to be the one to move towards the connection, because
Yeah.
maybe there's the conditioning of like, whoa, that's
Yeah.
vulnerable, that's edgy. The other person might be feeling resistance to that level of openness, but then your perseverance of, yeah, I'm just going to say it again. I'm going to say it again. I want to connect with you. I like how this feels. And I guess to pin that, like to highlight, like to condense that down, is what I'm really hearing is just how much courage there is in the willingness to move towards the connection and
Mm.
build the mature qualities of relational skills.
Mm.
Like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm just going to name the thing that might be felt in the field, but no one's talking about it. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I wanna give credit here to really my what I describe as like my relational inheritance, that they really inherited whole and well ways of relating. And so much of what you describe, yes, it's courage, but it takes less courage when you start from solid footing than if you're on a tippy edge and you're coming from generational trauma relationally or something like that. And I really do want to acknowledge and honor, like I don't know how it came to be, but I really feel like I was like gifted this solid foundation of inherent worth. And we all have that, but to tap into that and access that, if we weren't raised or where we were raised, where our worth or our belovedness was really conditional, whether that is in our broader community or in our family systems. And so to come from that solid foundation of like being rooted and standing upon that inherent worth and feeling that kind of well relating at my back and
Mm.
knowing that I've got that both, generationally and in my upbringing, but also in my marriage. Like you described trusting this calling, like, oh my gosh, we don't know anybody, but there was also a trusting of each other in that process, that relationship is solid. And no matter what happens, like I'm okay, we're okay. We could get there and it could be a total flop, but we'll be okay. We'll find a way through it because we've got ourselves, we've got that solid foundation of worth, and we've got each other, we've got each other's backs. And so I don't want to minimize how much that bolsters me, because yes, that takes courage, and I really honor and acknowledge those that are doing the work of reweaving village or rewriting new patterns of relating, or that maturation process of relating, that are coming from contexts and backgrounds of harm and relational harm. And it's been actually quite a privilege and an honor to walk alongside those folks and do that kind of lending process. Like, hey, like hear how terrifying it is and that it's hard to believe that this is possible. I'm going to believe for you because I can do that. I like that's actually, and now I've got over a decade's worth of kind of community living, 15 years really of community living under my belt. I can offer you that belief. And you don't need to have it for yourself. I'll hold that with you or alongside you as we witness and like hold your hand in that new way of relating or that pattern rewriting that you might be doing.
I can,
So
I was
thank you
gonna
for the acknowledgement, but
I was
yeah.
gonna actually say that. I was gonna say that I can feel you exude that, that
Mm,
you, your energy and your being, I can feel, it in your body. And it's such a gift that you give, I can feel that in myself because there's like, um, you make it feel tangible because you know it. Yeah.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's the gift we give when we've had experiences in our body and we know it, then it's like we're just shining that all around. And
Yeah.
I'd love to just really briefly hear if you're open to sharing. I know we have just a little bit of time, but what did that look like growing up? How was that? How did you inherit that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I just want to acknowledge too, this is so much the work I see you guys talking about in conscious parenting, right? It's
Mm.
creating that sound nervous system space for your littles, and as they grow and like they feel that solid footing. I was raised in a church context, and one that was, I know a lot of, and again acknowledge a lot of people inside organized religion experience a lot of trauma and harm, but I was really gifted with an experience that was quite whole and intergenerational, multicultural, very well educated. It was out at a university campus, so very conscious, thoughtful community of people. And my parents, I think, both came from pretty grounded households themselves, and really raised me where there was like never a doubt that I am beloved, beloved by them, beloved by God. Like, and that was, it was like anything else, like, yeah, yeah, you'll make mistakes and we'll forgive you and you'll work through it. But no matter what happens, you are beloved. And I just think when I think about parenting now, my own girls, and gosh, the moments I'm sure I get it wrong, I always just come back to that. Like, if there is anything I want to know that they know, it's that, like, they are loved unconditionally. And if they know that beyond a doubt, like, we can go through the ups and downs. And, our relationship may take many iterations over the years. But if they have that to stand on, I think that if there's anything I could gift them, it's that. And really, it was a household of a lot of like open door, a lot of hospitality. I think we talked about this on our live together. Just folks coming to stay with our family, coming for meals. My dad loves to cook, and I would say we had people over for dinner like at least once a week, if not more, um, growing up. And so I think my husband and I, when we moved into an intentional community early in our marriage, a couple years in, we were in our 20s. We didn't do it necessarily with the intention to go and live in community. We went because we were going to run this wilderness adventure program and it sounded really cool and fun, but happened to be in a community. And I just think it didn't seem that crazy or strange to us because we had been raised in, both of us had been raised in that kind of context of broader church community. And it's something I see a lot of folks now grappling with is what they might describe as like a spiritual homelessness, where they were raised maybe
Mhm.
inside of a faith community of some kind, and for whatever reason have found themselves no longer resonating with those spaces. And I mean, that's sort of part of our story as well. We aren't currently and haven't been connected to any kind of church community in the last 5 years. Um, and and yet they crave and miss those pieces of coming together to help each other. For me, absolutely growing up, when we got engaged, there was like 30 women at my home who threw a shower and offered words of encouragement and affirmation and showered me with gifts and advice and support and showed up to bake cookies and help prepare food and showed up the day of to set, like that's just what we did. That's how it was, and multi-generational. And so I think there's some really whole and well beautiful things that exist sometimes in those
Mhm.
organized spaces, and not always, right? Anything
Mhm.
can warp and distort, and a lot of people do experience complex harm in spaces like that. And so it's always a curiosity for me, that dance for folks as they cultivate village and community in their lives, that how what structures get put in place to really support that, those third spaces, and you know and where do those tip over into more complexity? And that's a whole other conversation. But I do relate a lot of my community orientation to that upbringing,
Mhm.
both in that affirmation of love and that affirmation of worth, and just the practical aspects of people showing up and helping each other. It's what we did. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm. Beautiful. I love feeling that from you, and the acknowledgement of where that spills over into your experience. And there's so many threads that I
Mhm.
would love to take. And I just want to thank you for sharing your gifts that, it sounds like life circumstance offered you, and what you're passionate about, what I experience is your soul is like here for. Thanks for bringing that into the collective healing and doing this work, forming people. That's something we're so passionate about, is the community piece. And we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing in our
Mhm.
dharma if it wasn't for how held we are with all of the layers of support
Mhm.
in it.
And watching the way that having such solid grounded, like what you're describing, like I didn't have that in that way, but our son does.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
watching, like for him, it's like a no question that he will be deeply loved and respected and met with presence by other people. Like,
Yeah.
and if somebody happens to somewhere walk up and they're not super present and they're not super, his face is like, what? And it's just like, it's just
Standards for
yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's just so clear that he, has value. He's beloved. And it's so normal for him to be, and just seeing the resilience that weaves in the
Mhm.
nervous system, that,
Yeah.
we can be having a rough day or whatever, or what. But for him, it's not his holding isn't just us. There's so
Yeah.
much more holding him. And so it's not, than whatever mom and dad are going through or whatever's going, like, is not like as scary because he's held by so much more. And
Yeah.
it's just really cool to feel what that does, you
Yeah.
know?
Which is so healing for us to witness, because
Yeah.
they're in my consciousness of like, huh, He is completely unshaken. That is not what I experienced growing up. There's the healing in that of having the mirror and reflection of what it is that we're bringing in for him, like
Yeah.
bringing in the village, cultivating, nurturing
Yeah.
that, to see from a vulnerable little being that was intentionally conceived and through all these stages, and we don't do it perfect, but whoa, when there's enough, I forget who it is. It says
Just
how
70,
much you
it's 30%
yeah,
attunement, but that's attunement, but we're talking about more than just that, but
yeah.
that's a layer, but
Just that piece of just being
yeah.
met enough with a nut, by a community of people, it creates so much resilience.
Mhm.
And I can,
Yeah.
to circle it back to what you shared, I can really feel that from you, and that
Mhm.
acknowledgement of what you based it in, what you developed in,
Mhm.
and that you just keep getting to move that forward. So thank you for sharing that. I
Mm.
feel my body got a bit of a download on
Mhm.
the experience that's different that you had than me. And I
Yeah.
can feel a quality there, and I'm grateful to
Yeah.
feel
Yeah. Thank
Well,
you.
honoring the work of reparenting oneself, and as we parent a next generation, we're all learning. Every generation, we're learning things too, right? So, I certainly don't show up to that journey perfectly at all either. But those moments, 7 generations forward and 7 generations back, that we do that healing work for. I really believe that, and see that it's big work when we choose to try something different than
Mhm.
maybe what we've experienced in the past. And so honoring you both for that work. I really respect the what you model and the ways you speak and share and steward the gifts that you have, and the ways of relating that you have developed, and the skills you've built. That's how I feel about it for myself too. That there's a responsibility when either we've been gifted much or we've cultivated much, to then steward that well, with a posture of generosity. And so it flows through. I see it flowing through your work, and that's my hope for my work also. Yeah.
Beautiful.
thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
God, I love reciprocal relationship.
Yeah.
Feels so good.
Yeah. I feel excited about what you're doing in the world for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
God, love feeling your work in the world. Excited to keep journeying.
Yeah.
I noticed such a resonance here, and I would love to continue on the connection here.
Yeah.
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 Ditto.
Yeah. And thank you all for listening. And my sense is, if you're still listening, you're also in that committed place of doing this work and building these relational skills. And to find that, what I really feel in this episode is that deep felt sense of belonging, and sharing the overflow of what comes from there, your gifts to the world. Thank you all for tuning in, being a part of this journey together. So grateful. Until next time.
Mm.
We want to thank you all for tuning in and listening, and a quick shout out to our sponsor, MINDFULMEDS. Their product is something that we personally use, love, and appreciate so deeply. They have such a range of medicinal mushrooms. There's microdosing with psilocybin, different variations of it. There's a line called Social Spark that was a collaboration with Kid Carson out of Vancouver. And the one that's my favorite is Happy Days. No psilocybin in there, just a lot of really incredible mushrooms. Cordyceps, lion's mane, just really good for my nervous system. And so if you want to make an order because you are a listener, we want to give you a discount, 15% off. All you have to do is in the checkout, put in the promo code TOGETHER. It's going to give you 15% off. Enjoy. Until next time.